In the opulent mansion, the sheikh's mother, once a sovereign presence, had become a silent shadow. His daughter-in-law, with an icy smile, had turned her into a forgotten phantom, forbidden to exist. But the suspicion of a distant son can unveil truths that silence would never tell. In his lavish Riyadh office, Sheikh Ali's laptop screen displayed complex financial charts, yet his mind was thousands of miles away at the mansion he called home. The image of his mother, once the vibrant pillar of his family, haunted his thoughts. Fatima, the matriarch silenced by a trauma that had stolen her voice, seemed, in Aisha's descriptions, an increasingly ethereal, almost non-existent figure. He recalled their last call. He'd asked about his mother, and Aisha's voice, usually so melodic, had taken on a slightly hurried tone, an almost imperceptible tension. "Everything's fine, darling. Mother is in her room, as always, resting." The words were reassuring, but something in Aisha's intonation, in the swiftness with which she changed the subject, had triggered a small alarm in Ali's mind. It wasn't the first time. For weeks, conversations about Fatima had felt slippery, evasive, as if Aisha were concealing an uncomfortable truth behind a veil of convenient normalcy. A pang of guilt pierced Ali. How long had it been since he'd had a real conversation with his mother? How long since he'd heard her warm laughter, felt the steadfastness of her counsel? The absence of her voice was an open wound, but his daughter-in-law's inability, or perhaps refusal, to fill that void was an even deeper one. He found himself recalling minor incidents. A call that ended abruptly when he approached, whispers that ceased the moment he entered a room. Aisha's strange behavior on the phone, always a little more reserved, more agitated when she thought he wasn't around. Distrust grew, a silent tumor in his chest. In that same mansion, where Fatima's shadow crept through the corridors, Aisha inspected the flower arrangements in the grand hall. A sweet scent of jasmine filled the air, but it didn't reach the distant alcove where Fatima watched the scene through a crack. Aisha turned to one of the maids, her voice cold and controlled, yet clear enough to be heard in the silence Fatima knew so well. "Ensure that Lady Fatima is not seen by unexpected visitors. She prefers the privacy of her quarters, doesn't she?" The words were not a question. They were an order, delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The maid nodded, head bowed, as Aisha walked away, the sway of her gold earrings echoing on the polished marble. In his Riyadh office, Ali's decision was made. The unease had transformed into an urgent need to know. He could no longer trust Aisha's words. He needed his own eyes, his own ears. He typed a message to his most discreet security contact, requesting the best covert surveillance equipment, the kind that could be installed without leaving the slightest trace. He would return home soon, and before his next trip, the truth would be installed right in the heart of his own house, observing what Aisha's silence and evasions refused to reveal. The game was about to change. Sheikh Ali watched the horizon glide by the window of his private jet, the clouds like a veil obscuring the truth. The unease he felt in Riyadh had now transformed into pressing anguish. Every kilometer separating him from his home seemed to accentuate the distance between what Aisha said and what his instinct whispered. As he stepped onto the Persian rug of the entrance hall, a familiar aroma of incense and jasmine enveloped him, but the feeling of home was tinged with a cold shadow. Aisha awaited him, a radiant smile on her lips, her eyes shining with an affection that seemed almost performative. "Darling, how good it is that you've arrived." Her melodic voice was a balm, but Ali noticed the way she hugged him a little tighter, the way her eyes scanned the room, as if searching for something or someone. He held her at arm's length, his eyes fixed on hers. "How is my mother, Aisha?" The question was direct. Without preamble, Aisha's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Ah, mother!" "She's fine, darling. Resting in her quarters, as usual. You know how she prefers tranquility." Her voice was soft, but Ali perceived the slight elevation in her tone as she uttered the last phrase, almost a punctuation, a rehearsed justification. That same night, under the cloak of darkness, Ali acted. He had sent his security team ahead under the pretext of an alarm system upgrade, but the real operation was much more delicate. Hassan, his head of security and longtime confidant, personally supervised the installation. In strategically chosen rooms, the living room, the kitchen, the main corridors, and even a discreet spot near Fatima's room, where a small lens could capture any movement in the adjacent hallway, pinholes were drilled with surgical precision. The micro-cameras, the size of grains of rice, were inserted into ornaments, into almost invisible cracks in door frames, behind paintings, in the folds of luxurious fabrics. The work was silent, methodical, conducted by technicians who moved like shadows. Each device was connected to a hidden server, transmitting real-time images to a secure device that Ali would take with him. Over the next few days, Ali tried, discreetly, to observe the dynamics of the house. Fatima was a present absence. He rarely saw her, and when he directly asked Aisha about her, his daughter-in-law always had a ready excuse, a reason for the matriarch's privacy. "She doesn't feel well enough to come down. She's meditating. She prefers the company of her books." The answers were always plausible, but Fatima's constant absence, the way her name seemed to be avoided in daily life, began to hammer in Ali's mind. He felt the pain of his silenced mother, but now that pain mingled with a cold and growing suspicion. His presence in the house, he realized, seemed to make Aisha redouble her efforts to maintain the facade, to control the narrative about Fatima. The days of his stay at home quickly ran out. His next business trip for an important summit was imminent. On the last day, as Aisha helped him pack his bags, she hugged him, murmuring sweet words. "I'll miss you, darling. Take care." Ali returned the embrace, a forced smile on his lips. His fingers touched the small device in his jacket's inner pocket, a thin, encrypted tablet that would soon become his eyes and ears in the mansion. He looked at Aisha, her face now a mask of expectation. Behind that smile, he knew, lay secrets, and very soon the stillness of that house would be shattered by truths that would echo louder than any voice. Sheikh Ali's private jet cut through the night skies, leaving behind the mansion that guarded its secrets. Aisha, with a silk scarf fluttering in the wind, waved from the main gate, her warm smile seeming like a distant mirage under the entrance lights. Ali waved back, a tight knot in his stomach. That smile, so full of affection, now felt like the edge of an abyss. Already in his Geneva hotel room, the view of the city lights twinkled outside, but Ali's eyes were fixed on a much smaller screen. The tablet in his hands seemed to pulsate with anticipation. With a final sigh, he activated the encrypted application. The screen came to life, showing a mosaic of small windows, each a portal to his home. The image of the living room appeared first, bathed in the soft light of a lamp. At first, nothing. The house seemed a sanctuary of peace, as silent as Fatima herself. Hours passed, then a day. Ali watched, patient, as the routine life of the mansion unfolded. The maids cleaned, the gardeners tended the garden, and Aisha, impeccable, supervised everything with her usual grace. Fatima was a constant absence, confirming Aisha's evasions. She didn't appear for meals, didn't walk the corridors, wasn't in any of the common areas. His mother's loneliness was palpable, even through the cameras. The first crack in Aisha's facade came during dinner. Ali watched the image of the dining room, where Aisha sat alone at the opulent table, talking on the phone with a friend. Her voice was light, full of laughter. Then, one of the maids approached, whispering something. Aisha raised an eyebrow, her smile disappearing. "Lady Fatima hasn't eaten anything today. So what? She has her own dishes in her room. Don't bother the chef to bring them down. She can serve herself if she wants." Aisha's voice, though maintaining a casual tone, carried a thread of contempt that chilled Ali's body. The maid nodded, head bowed, and withdrew. Aisha's laughter immediately returned to the phone, as if nothing had happened. Ali felt a sharp pang. His mother, deprived of her voice, was being deprived of food. The image of Fatima, fragile and silent, flooded his mind. He fast-forwarded the recordings, focusing on the corridors and the area near his mother's room. The next morning, the scene that unfolded in the kitchen hit him like a blow. Aisha came downstairs, radiant in a silk dress. She found Fatima in the kitchen, sitting at the table, her gaze lost in the empty teacups. Fatima picked up a fruit from the fruit bowl, a dried date, and brought it to her mouth. Aisha stopped. Her eyes, once so full of light, hardened. "Mother, please." "Don't touch the fruit on the main table," Aisha said, her voice cold and controlled. "That is for guests. If you want to eat, ask the maid to bring you something from your personal stock." Fatima merely looked at her, the date still between her fingers. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep, resigned sadness. Aisha approached, quickly took the date from Fatima's hand, and placed it back in the fruit bowl. "We won't have a lack of etiquette. It's a matter of respect." Ali felt the blood boil in his veins. His mother, treated like a disobedient child, humiliated for a piece of fruit. Fury simmered, but he forced himself to remain calm, his eyes glued to the screen. The horror began to mix with a cold determination. This was not the Aisha he knew, or thought he knew. This was a stranger, a predator beneath his wife's skin. Later he saw Aisha in the living room, instructing the maids. "Make sure Lady Fatima spends her time in her quarters. She has everything she needs there. And don't let her wander through the halls. We don't want her to bother anyone." Aisha's tone was soft, but the words were like razors. The maids nodded, their faces impassive, but Ali could feel the tension, the silent fear hanging in the air. The stillness of the mansion, once a refuge, was now the stage for a silent nightmare. Ali, thousands of miles away, watched the cruelty unfold, each scene another piece in the puzzle of his growing pain and indignation. The image of Fatima, alone in her room, eating the date a maid had brought her later, her eyes fixed on a distant point, was the final straw. The truth was darker than any suspicion, and with each passing second, Ali's anger transformed into a relentless promise of justice. The promise of justice weighed heavier than the air Ali breathed. It wasn't just anger. It was a stabbing pain that tore at his chest, a betrayal that corroded the foundation of his own home. The sight of his mother, hunched, eating the furtive date, was an image etched into his soul, a seal for the silent cruelty Aisha inflicted. He continued to watch, each minute of footage a new hammer striking the wall of his denial, shattering it into pieces. The next day, the scene that unfolded in the living room was one of calculated coldness. Aisha was receiving a friend for afternoon tea, their laughter echoing cheerfully. Fatima descended the stairs, moving with the slowness of years and pain. She paused at the archway, perhaps drawn by human voices, by the desire for some interaction. Her eyes, once full of life, were now wells of resignation. Aisha, seeing her, did not rise. Instead, her smile widened almost imperceptibly, a mask of false solicitude. "Mother, what a pleasant surprise," Aisha said, her voice melodious, but with a subtext that only Ali on the other side of the screen could discern. "I thought you were resting. Come, sit with us, if you wish." Aisha's friend nodded with a polite smile, but Ali noticed Aisha's quick glance at the maid serving tea, a silent command. The maid, with a tray in her hands, moved slightly to block the passage to the main sofa, offering a small, isolated stool, almost hidden behind a large plant. Fatima stopped, hesitated. Her eyes met Aisha's for an instant, and Ali saw the spark of hope extinguish. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The invitation was a trap, the offer of a seat, a way to isolate her further. With an almost inaudible sigh, Fatima shook her head and turned, returning to the solitude of her quarters. "Oh, what a shame," Aisha murmured to her friend, a tone of feigned lament. "She really prefers her own company. It's a pity, isn't it? Ever since her trauma, she's become so reclusive." The friend nodded sympathetically, and Aisha returned to the conversation. Fatima's episode swept under the rug of convenience. Ali's heart pounded in his chest. There was no physical violence, but the subtle humiliation, the way Fatima was reduced to a phantom, was a much more insidious torture. He fast-forwarded the images to the kitchen again. Later that day, Aisha was instructing a new maid, a young woman with frightened eyes. "Listen carefully," Aisha said, her voice firm and without its usual warmth. "Lady Fatima is delicate. She has her own needs and schedules. You don't need to worry about bringing her to meals with the family. If she wants to eat, let her do so in her room. And please, don't encourage her to wander. She gets lost easily." The words were like iron, forging an invisible cage around Fatima. The young maid nodded, terrified. Night fell again, and Ali couldn't take his eyes off the screen. He saw Fatima in the corridor, walking slowly towards the library, an old book in her hands. It seemed she sought solace in the pages, a refuge from the reality that surrounded her. However, Aisha suddenly emerged, like a shadow, intercepting her before she reached the door. "Mother, where do you think you're going?" Aisha asked, her voice low and controlled but penetrating. "The library is a bit dusty today, don't you think? And your glasses. Are you sure you can read well in this light? Perhaps it's better to return to your room, where everything is more comfortable." She touched Fatima's arm with slight pressure, a gesture that seemed helpful, but was, in fact, a gentle push back into confinement. Fatima looked at the book in her hands, then at Aisha, and finally at the library door, a silent yearning in her eyes. Without a word, she turned, her bowed figure disappearing down the corridor, the book seeming too heavy. Ali felt the fury transform into a cold stone in his stomach. What Aisha was doing was not just neglect, it was a gradual annihilation, an attempt to erase his mother's existence. Aisha's smile, her soft voice, her seemingly harmless gestures, all now revealed themselves as the tools of boundless cruelty. He closed the tablet, the clicking sound echoing in the silence of his hotel room. The view of Geneva's lights blurred. The truth was a monster he had unleashed, and now there was no containing it. With each passing second, the decision crystallized in his mind. He needed to return. The riddle of evasions and Fatima's silence had been deciphered, and the revelation that would change everything was about to explode in the heart of his own home. The click of the closed tablet resonated in Ali's ears, a final, definitive sound. Geneva's twinkling lights, once a tapestry of beauty, now seemed cold and distant, a world oblivious to the storm brewing in his chest. The truth was a monster, not just revealed, but unleashed, and there was no containing it. With each pounding beat of his heart, the decision solidified, an unwavering pillar of steel. He needed to return. Now. Aisha's charade, Fatima's silent suffering, every piece of the puzzle was in place, forming an image of cruelty so cold and calculated that it chilled Ali's blood. The stabbing pain that tore at his chest was not just for his mother, but for the betrayal, for the facade of his own life crumbling. How could he have been so blind? Guilt gnawed at him, but it was the promise of justice that propelled him, a relentless force. He picked up the phone, his fingers moving with feverish and determined speed. His executive assistant's voice, usually calm and controlled, trembled slightly upon hearing Ali's tone. "Cancel everything, all appointments, immediately," he ordered, his voice grave, leaving no room for objection. "I need a flight home as soon as possible, no matter the cost, no matter the time." The assistant, experienced enough to discern the gravity of his words, merely confirmed with silent, hurried efficiency. The hours that followed were torture. Ali couldn't sit still, his mind a whirlwind of images. Fatima hunched, the date in her hand, the look of resignation. Aisha, with her melodic smile and venomous words, erecting invisible walls around his mother. Fury simmered, but it was a cold, calculated rage, tempered by icy determination. He would not act on impulse, but with the precision of a surgeon, unraveling every lie, confronting every cruelty. Night dissolved into a pale dawn as Ali's private jet cut through the sky, a solitary arrow aimed at the heart of his home. Every minute in the air was an eternity of anticipation. Below, the world continued its rhythm, oblivious to the storm he carried within him. He imagined Aisha, perhaps at that very moment with her mask of perfection, continuing her theater of invisibility for Fatima. The idea made his stomach churn. When the first golden lights of the sun touched the familiar landscape, revealing the contours of the desert and the vast expanses of his land, an oppressive silence fell over Ali. His estate, once a haven of peace, now seemed a stage for a dark drama. From above, the mansion was a fortress, imposing and serene, but he knew that behind its walls a silent battle was being waged. The roar of the plane's engines filled the cabin as the aircraft began its descent. Every inch that separated him from the ground was a step closer to the explosion of truth. The gentle jolt of landing resonated not only in the fuselage, but in every fiber of Ali's being. The silence that followed the shutdown of the engines on the hot asphalt of the private runway was dense, laden with a promise. He was back. Not as the Sheikh Ali who had left, but as a son seeking justice, ready to tear away the veil of illusion and unmask the cold cruelty that had nested in his home. The revelation that would change everything was no longer a distant threat. It was there, about to be uncovered, in the heart of his own house. The silence that swallowed Ali upon disembarking was heavier than the air he breathed. The car tires crunched on the gravel driveway, a sound that was once familiar and welcoming, now seemed an alarm. The mansion, with its imposing walls and flowering gardens, looked like a theater set, perfect on the outside, but with a dark drama hidden in its depths. As he stepped out, the wind carried a scent of jasmine that always reminded him of home. But today, even the fragrance seemed laden with falsehood. The main door opened before he even reached it, revealing Aisha in all her splendor. She wore an elegant kaftan, her dark hair meticulously styled, a radiant smile on her lips. "Ali, my love, what a wonderful surprise." Her voice was pure melody, a stark contrast to the discord he carried in his chest. She ran to hug him, her arms enveloping him with a familiarity that now seemed alien, almost repulsive. Ali returned the embrace mechanically, his muscles tense, feeling the warmth of her body as a cold irony. His eyes scanned the hall, searching for any sign, any remnant of the fragile figure he had seen on the screens. "I didn't expect you so soon," she continued, pulling back slightly to look at him, her eyes twinkling with a surprise Ali knew was carefully staged. "Were there any problems with the meetings in Geneva?" Ali forced a smile, a mask as well placed as hers. "Urgent matters arose here at home, Aisha," he said, his voice a little deeper than usual but controlled. "I needed to return." He paused, his gaze fixed on hers. "Where is my mother?" Aisha blinked, and for a millisecond, Ali saw a shadow cross her eyes, an almost imperceptible hesitation. But she recovered quickly, her smile widening. "Ah, mother." "She's in her room, as always," she replied, a subtle tone of lament in her voice. "You know how reclusive she's become since the trauma. She prefers her own company. She barely leaves her room." Aisha's words flowed with ease, a rehearsed narrative Ali had watched unfold countless times on screen. Every syllable was a stab in the open wound of his heart. He could imagine the scenario: Fatima, trapped in her own quarters, while Aisha wove the web of invisibility around her. "I understand," Ali murmured, taking a step back. "Well, I'd like to see her. After such a long journey, I need a moment to myself." Aisha nodded with understanding, her hand touching his arm in a gesture of support that now seemed like a nod of victory. "Of course, my love. I'll ask them to prepare something for you to eat, and perhaps a relaxing bath, but don't take too long. Tell me about your trip later." Ali merely nodded, already turning and ascending the grand staircase, his steps echoing on the polished marble. Each step was a step closer to the truth he was about to unearth. Ali's breathing became uneven as he approached his mother's room. The corridor was silent, the atmosphere heavy, as if the air itself carried the weight of her absence and the suffering contained within. He stopped before Fatima's door, his heart beating a frantic rhythm in his chest. He raised his hand to knock, but hesitated, remembering the images. Fatima hunched, her eyes fixed on a distant point. What would he say? How would he embrace her without breaking the fragile shield she had built around herself? Instead of knocking, Ali gently turned the doorknob and opened the door. The room was in twilight, the heavy curtains blocking out the sunlight. Fatima was sitting in her favorite armchair, her back to the door, a melancholy silhouette against the window. In her hands, she held an old book, its pages yellowed, but her eyes were not fixed on them. She was looking out the window, at the vast desert beyond, as if seeking something lost on the horizon. A deep stillness filled the space, interrupted only by Fatima's soft breathing. Ali watched for a moment, pain spreading through his chest. That sight, the silent confirmation of everything he had seen, was a blow stronger than any cry or wail. He could feel her loneliness, the resignation emanating from her bowed posture. "Mother," he said, his voice hoarse, breaking the spell of silence. Fatima trembled, her shoulders jumping in a startle. She turned slowly, the book slipping from her hands to the carpet. Her eyes, once distant, met his, and Ali saw surprise, then a flicker of something he hadn't seen in a long time, a spark of life, mixed with a pain so profound it almost made him collapse. A silent tear rolled down Fatima's wrinkled face. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes was a river of unspoken emotions, shock, relief, and a sadness that seemed eternal. Ali crossed the room in 3 long strides, kneeling beside the armchair, his hands firmly holding hers. Fatima's hands were cold and thin, but the squeeze she gave in return was surprisingly strong. He embraced her, holding her close, feeling the tremor in her fragile body. Warm tears streamed down his own face, wetting his mother's hair. He had no words for what he felt, only the silent promise that it would end. The revelation was no longer a threat, but an urgency, a fire burning in his veins. It would be unearthed, and with it the fury of a son who had finally understood the true extent of the cruelty his home harbored. The embrace was a broken dam. Ali poured all his remorse, all his sorrow, all his love into that desperate embrace. Fatima, in his arms, was a light, fragile weight, but the tremor that ran through her was not just from shock, but from an emotion repressed for too long. He felt her hands squeeze him, a return embrace that spoke volumes without a single word. Ali's tears wet the fabric of her old dress, and he made no effort to contain them. They were the tears of a son who had been blind, who had failed. "Mother," he whispered, his voice choked. "I'm so sorry. I know. I saw." Fatima pulled back slightly, her eyes fixed on his, brimming with an ancient pain and a new faint hope. She raised a trembling hand to Ali's face, her thin fingers tracing the contour of his jaw, as if she needed to confirm that he was real, that he was not another cruel illusion. A faint sound escaped her lips, a muffled lament that formed no words, but carried the weight of years of silence and suffering. Ali held her again, her head nestled on his shoulder. He knew it was not the time for detailed explanations, for the fury that boiled within him. It was time to restore, somehow, his mother's stolen dignity, to show her that she was no longer alone. "Don't be afraid, Mother. No more," he promised, his voice a solemn oath. "I am here, and everything will change." The stillness in the room was profound, but now it was not the stillness of resignation, but of promise. Ali remained there for a long time, just holding Fatima, feeling her breathing slowly calm against his neck. The embrace was a link, a bridge rebuilt over an abyss of pain. He felt a renewed strength, a clarity that propelled him. It was time to act. With a final squeeze, Ali pulled away, his eyes still fixed on Fatima's. He helped her sit back in the armchair, and she watched him with an intensity that pierced him. He kissed her forehead, feeling her cold, wrinkled skin. "I need to sort some things out, Mother, but I'll be back." He left Fatima's room, closing the door with a soft click that resonated through the silent corridor. Every step he took now was firm, purposeful. The mask of control he had worn with Aisha was no longer there. In its place, there was a cold and unwavering resolve. He descended the staircase with controlled speed, his mind already outlining the plan of action. Aisha was in the living room, sitting elegantly on one of the velvet sofas, leafing through a fashion magazine with a cup of tea beside her. The afternoon light bathed the room, highlighting the studied serenity on her face. She looked up when Ali entered, an immediate smile appearing. "Already missing Mother, my love?" she asked, her voice sweet, laden with a veiled irony Ali now recognized with disgust. "I hope she hasn't caused any trouble." Ali stopped in the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his body erect. An imposing presence that made Aisha raise an eyebrow slightly. Her smile faltered for an instant, as if she sensed a change in the air, a cold current that didn't belong in that environment. "No, Aisha, my mother hasn't caused any trouble," Ali replied, his voice calm, almost soft, but with an edge of steel. "But the truth, it seems, cannot be contained for long." Aisha closed the magazine, placing it delicately on the coffee table. Her eyes, once bright, now held a cautious glint. "What are you talking about, Ali? You seem disturbed." "I am disturbed, Aisha," he confirmed, taking a step forward. "Disturbed by the way the woman I swore to love treated the woman who gave birth to me. Disturbed by the cold cruelty you hid beneath your facade of perfection." Aisha's face hardened, the smile disappearing completely. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment the mask fell, revealing an expression of calculation and contempt. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your mother has always been difficult, reclusive. I did my best." "Don't lie to me, Aisha." Ali's voice rose a tone, but still held a chilling calm. I saw everything, every venomous word, every look of contempt, every plate of food cast aside, every moment when you reduced her to nothing in her own home. The cameras I installed before traveling showed me the truth, a truth that sickens me." The room fell silent. The sound of the wind outside, rustling the palm leaves, seemed a distant whisper. Shock flooded Aisha's face, replacing coldness with terrified disbelief. Her lips moved, but no words came out. The air seemed thin, dense with the sudden and brutal revelation. Aisha's facade, meticulously built over the years, crumbled into ruins before Ali's eyes. The storm he had carried within him finally exploded, not with a roar, but with the cutting precision of undeniable truth. The game was over. The silence that followed Ali's declaration was more deafening than any scream. Aisha remained motionless, her face drained of color, her eyes fixed on his, a mixture of terror and calculation. The cup of tea, untouched, rested on the coffee table, its warmth evaporating into the dense air. For a moment she seemed like a statue, the perfection of her countenance fractured by the sudden incursion of truth. Her lips moved again, but the sound that emerged was a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible. "Cameras. What are you saying?" Her voice was a thin thread, devoid of her former forced sweetness, stripped of her usual confidence. Ali did not waver. His eyes were glacial blue, reflecting the contained fury he had suppressed for days. "I am saying, Aisha, that every mocking laugh, every look of contempt, every plate of food cast aside, every moment when my mother was treated as an invisible burden in her own home is recorded. I saw you. I saw the cold and cruel woman you became when you thought no one was watching." Aisha staggered backward, leaning on the sofa. A tremor ran through her body. The shock transformed into a sudden, uncontrolled rage that distorted her features. "She's a useless old woman, a burden. What did you want me to do? Just pretend she didn't exist, that she wasn't a shadow in our lives, shaming us with her muteness and melancholy?" Her voice rose, losing all trace of delicacy, revealing the harshness Ali knew lay beneath the surface. It was the voice he had heard in the videos, the same one that had broken his mother's spirit. "You dare to justify your cruelty?" Ali asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You dare to speak like that of the woman who gave birth to me, who built this house and this family? You are not worthy of even treading on this sacred ground." Aisha laughed, a shrill, humorless sound. "Sacred? This place is a prison, a golden prison, yes, but still a prison. And your mother, she is the silent sentinel, always there, always judging with her empty eyes." The air in the room seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the confrontation. A gust of wind entered through the window, making the silk curtains sway gently, like ghosts watching the drama. Ali took another step, closing the distance between them. "You understand nothing, Aisha. My mother is not a burden. She is the essence of this family, the living memory of who we are. And you, with your empty ambition and your cruelty, tried to erase that." "So what are you going to do?" she spat, fear still visible in her eyes, but now mixed with a desperate defiance. "Are you going to divorce me? Are you going to throw me out? Are you going to expose me to the scorn of everyone because of an old woman who doesn't even speak?" Ali stared at her, his gaze piercing. "You will not be thrown out, Aisha. You will leave of your own accord, without honor, without dignity. But first, you will face the consequences of your actions." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Everyone will see what you did. Every member of this family, every person in our community will know the truth. And then you will no longer be my wife. You will be just a bitter memory." Aisha flinched, blood seeming to drain from her face again. The threat of public exposure, of loss of status and reputation, was the most precise blow Ali could deliver. She valued her image above all else. "No, it can't be," she murmured, her voice breaking. "You wouldn't do that. Think of your reputation, Ali, of our family." "Our family has already been stained by your hands, Aisha," Ali replied, the hardness in his voice cutting off any hope she might have of manipulation. "And my reputation, it will be restored when I correct the mistake of having brought you into this house. The truth will come out, and then you will no longer be my wife. You will be just a bitter memory." Aisha cowered, her body trembling visibly. The house of cards she had built with lies and deceit crumbled around her, swept away by the torrent of Ali's truth. The smile that once adorned her lips had been replaced by an expression of dread and desolation. She was lost, and she knew it. Ali felt a knot in his stomach. There was no satisfaction in the sight of her terror, only the profound sadness of a betrayed love and the bitter necessity of justice. "I give you 24 hours to pack your things," Ali said, his voice an unquestionable command. 24 hours to leave this house. After that, the truth will be revealed, and you will have nothing left. He turned, leaving Aisha alone in the vastness of the room, her once imposing figure now seeming small and fragile, crushed under the weight of the revelation. The echo of his steps resonated through the marble, each beat a nail in the coffin of the lie that had dominated his home for too long. The storm had not merely exploded, it had left only destruction in its wake and the promise of a new dawn. The echo of Ali's footsteps faded, leaving Aisha alone in a cutting silence. The vast living room, once the stage for her perfect performance, now felt like a cold mausoleum, its splendor a cruel irony. She remained motionless for a long moment, her body still trembling, her gaze fixed on the spot where Ali had stood. His image, his unwavering resolve, branded itself into her mind like a hot iron. The cup of tea on the coffee table, already cold, seemed a vestige of a life that had just evaporated. Aisha reached out, her fingers brushing the porcelain, but she didn't pick it up. Her own skin was cold, a shiver running through her. The initial terror gave way to an icy fury, a rage that burned beneath the surface of her dread. He couldn't do this. He couldn't destroy everything she had built. A low howl escaped her lips, a sound more animal than human. She raised her head, her eyes sweeping the room, the artworks, the luxurious furniture, everything she considered hers. Her entire life, her status, her reputation. Everything was at stake, all because of that mute old woman and Ali's obsession. With a choked cry, Aisha threw the fashion magazine that lay on the table, tearing it in half with unexpected force. The colorful pages flew through the air, falling like ridiculous confetti. She began to pace back and forth, her steps echoing on the polished marble. A harsh, uneven sound. The images from the videos, Ali's words, repeated in her head. The cameras. He saw everything, every glance, every venomous whisper, every time she reveled in her power over Fatima. Aisha stopped before an ornate mirror, her own reflection staring back. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair slightly disheveled, her mouth twisted into a mask of despair and rage. The perfection she had so carefully cultivated had unraveled in moments. It was the image of a cornered woman, her facade crumbling. "He can't," she murmured to herself, her voice hoarse. "He can't destroy me like this." But Ali's threat was real. Public exposure was the worst punishment, the loss of everything she valued, the scorn of society, the shame of her family, the ruin of her name. It was a social death sentence, far worse than any physical prison. Aisha ran upstairs, her heels clattering loudly on each step. Her steps were disordered, urgency consuming her. Time, that cruel executioner, was running out. 24 hours. 24 hours to dismantle her life, to leave the mansion she had planned to dominate completely. As she entered her room, the opulence of the surroundings seemed to mock her. Silks, jewels, expensive perfumes. Everything seemed insignificant now, worthless in the face of the imminent threat. She opened the closet, revealing a vast collection of designer clothes. Her fingers trembled as she pulled a leather suitcase from the top shelf. But what to take? How to choose between the pieces of a life she would no longer have? What did it mean to have these possessions if she didn't have the status to display them? Rage and panic mingled, forming a knot in her stomach. Downstairs, the silence that followed Ali's departure from the living room was different. It was not the suffocating stillness Aisha imposed, but rather a tense calm, like the eye of a hurricane. Ali ascended the stairs again, his heart still heavy, but his mind lighter for the truth spoken. The pain of confronting Aisha was immense, but the prospect of justice for his mother propelled him. He felt the ground beneath his feet more solid, as if an invisible weight had been removed from his shoulders. As he passed Fatima's room, he hesitated. A soft, almost inaudible melody came from within. It was Fatima's voice, humming an old lullaby Ali remembered from his childhood. The door was slightly ajar, and Ali peeked in. Fatima was sitting in her armchair, her eyes closed, a fragile smile on her lips. The sound of her voice, a faint thread of melody Ali hadn't heard in years, was the most powerful proof that the new dawn had already begun. Ali retreated, not wanting to interrupt that precious moment. He needed to ensure that sound, that promise of life, would never be silenced again. The battle was far from over, but the first step had been taken. The truth had been revealed, and its shockwaves would reverberate throughout the house, throughout the family, and throughout the community. The path to healing and restoration would be long, but for the first time in years, there was hope. The shattering of the photo glass reverberated in the opulence of the room, a sharp sound that Aisha felt in her soul. The fragments scattered on the floor looked like tiny mirrors of her own ruin. The evening gown, unceremoniously thrown on the bed, was a cruel reminder of a future that no longer existed. The social humiliation, the scorn, these were the demons that haunted her, far worse than material loss. She couldn't afford to be the laughing stock of the city, the woman who tried to destroy the matriarch and failed. Her hungry gaze swept over the closet. What to take? Jewels, clothes, money. None of it would hold the same value outside that status, outside Ali's shadow. She grabbed a pile of silk, crushing the luxurious fabric in her hands. A cold rage, more potent than panic, began to simmer. He couldn't just discard her. She was Sheikh Ali's wife. Her name was linked to his, to wealth, to power. A creak at the bedroom door made her jump. It wasn't Ali. It was the maid, a young, silent woman who always avoided Aisha's gaze. The maid stopped at the threshold, a tray of fruit and a glass of water in her hand, her eyes lowered, avoiding the visible chaos in her mistress's room. "Aisha!" The maid's voice was a whisper, almost inaudible. Aisha felt an uncontrollable tremor. The maid had always called her Madam Aisha. The forced familiarity was an insult. The young woman's gaze, however brief, seemed to carry a mixture of pity and contempt. The information must have already spread through the corners of the house, whispered among the staff. Aisha's sandcastle was crumbling before everyone's eyes. "Get out!" Aisha screamed, her voice hoarse with despair and fury. The maid flinched, leaving the tray on the nearest dresser and hurrying out, her steps echoing down the corridor. Aisha ran to the door, slamming it shut with a bang that made the walls vibrate. She was cornered, but she wasn't ready to surrender. Not without a fight. A dangerous idea began to form in her mind, a twisted thread of hope born of her own cruelty. What did Ali need to expose her? Evidence. What if she could destroy that evidence? While terror transformed into a sickly determination, Ali was immersed in his office, the computer screen illuminating his face in shadows and light. Fatima's melody, though distant, still reached his ears, a balm amidst the storm of images he was compiling. Each clip was a blow, a stab to the soul as he watched his mother, the strong and vibrant woman he knew, reduced to a shadow. He watched a clip again. Aisha, a cruel smile on her lips, intentionally knocking over a glass of water near Fatima's feet, forcing his mother to bend down, trembling to clean it. In another, Aisha ignored Fatima's silent attempts to get her attention, turning her back with icy indifference. Aisha's voice, once whispering and sweet to him, now sounded sharp and full of scorn in the recordings. Ali closed his eyes for an instant, feeling a knot in his throat. It wasn't just the cruelty, but the cowardice. His mother, voiceless, unprotected. Guilt squeezed him, a weight he would carry forever. But that guilt also fueled his resolve. He would not fail her again. He thought of the family's gaze, of close friends. Reputation, so valued in their culture, would be shaken. But his mother's honor was more important. He was preparing a digital dossier, irrefutable evidence for the family elders, for the council if necessary. The world needed to know the truth about Aisha and the truth about Fatima's resilience. A discreet alarm sounded on his wristwatch, marking the passage of another hour. Time was running out for Aisha, but also for him. He needed to be ready. Justice would be slow, perhaps painful, but it would be done. His office door was slightly ajar, and a glimpse of the crescent moon could be seen through the window, casting a silvery light over the garden. The house, once a sanctuary of secrets, was now in a state of revelation. Aisha, with a feverish glint in her eyes, thought of the files, the camera system. It wouldn't be easy, but she would do anything to erase the trail of her cruelty. With a dangerous plan crystallizing in her mind, she grabbed an emergency flashlight from a drawer and opened the bedroom door. The mansion was immersed in a stillness that seemed to portend chaos. Her furtive steps barely made a sound on the soft carpet as she descended the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. Time was running out, and the night would be long, fraught with risks and desperate determination. Aisha slid through the mansion's darkness, the narrow beam of the emergency flashlight dancing ahead of her, revealing and swallowing shadows. Every floorboard that creaked under her feet sounded like a cannon shot in the oppressive silence. The sound of her own heart pounded in her ears, a frantic drum that threatened to betray her presence. Fatima's soft melody, coming from upstairs, was a distant, almost inaudible echo, yet an annoying reminder of the woman she wanted to silence forever. She reached Ali's office door. She tried the doorknob, but it was locked as expected. A mutter escaped her dry lips. Ali was no fool. He knew what she would do. But where would he keep the recordings? He was methodical, organized. He wouldn't leave them in an obvious place. Her mind raced, tracing Ali's habits, the places he considered safe. The safe, that heavy safe, built into the wall behind a bookshelf. She knew the combination, a wedding gift, a private joke he never changed. With the flashlight in her mouth, illuminating the way, Aisha went to the bookshelf. Her fingers slid over the leather-bound volumes, finding the pressure mechanism that released the secret section. The wood yielded with a muffled creak, revealing the steel door of the safe. With trembling hands, she spun the dial, the mechanical clicks sounding terribly loud in the night silence. The door opened with a metallic whisper. The interior was tidy. Some important documents, a handful of family jewels not worn daily, and deep inside, a small external hard drive unit. It was small, discreet, perfectly designed to store gigabytes of video. Aisha picked it up, feeling the cold weight of the metal in her palm. This was the heart of her ruin. Meanwhile, in his office, Ali adjusted the last video sequences. The screen glowed with Aisha's image, the sadistic smile as she refused to offer Fatima water, his mother's eyes pleading. Ali's resolve hardened with each scene. He had everything, every moment of calculated cruelty, every sigh of his mother's despair. The digital dossier was complete, ready to be presented. He saved the final file, double-checking that everything was in order. He rose from his chair, stretching his back. Fatima's melody, now a little clearer, seemed a hymn of liberation, a lullaby for justice. He felt a warmth in his chest, a strange mixture of pain and relief. The truth would come out, and his mother would finally have peace. He thought of the family elders, of the bonds of honor and respect that sustained their clan. The revelation would be an earthquake, but the foundation would be stronger afterward. Ali grabbed a glass of water and went to the window, watching the crescent moon that painted the garden with silver. There was a serenity in the nocturnal landscape, a contrast to the storm brewing inside the house. He felt that Aisha was near, that the calm before the final confrontation was almost palpable. But he couldn't imagine what she was doing at that exact moment. Back in the office, Aisha clutched the hard drive unit in her hand. It wasn't enough to simply have the disk. He could have copies. Ali was too smart. She needed to destroy the original source, the recording system itself. Where would it be? The thought led her back to the rooms, to the blind spots she had used in her humiliations. The camera system, not just the images, but the devices. She moved with a new urgency, the plan crystallizing in her mind. Where would Ali have installed the invisible eyes? In the frames? In the decorative objects? She needed to search, to look in every corner, every crack. Icy fury propelled her. She would not be the victim. She would not be the joke. Her search began in her own room, where the shattered photo lay on the floor. She ignored the fragments, the crumpled silk dress. Her fingers ran over the shelves, the lamps, even the corners of the ceiling. Nothing. She moved to the corridors, then to the living and dining rooms. With each failure, her wild determination grew. Fatima's last melody ceased upstairs some time ago, replaced by a heavy silence. Aisha felt a shiver. Ali's mother was sleeping, oblivious to the dark treasure hunt taking place below. Or perhaps she knew, perhaps she was just waiting. Aisha finally reached Fatima's room. The door was ajar, inviting and frightening. She hesitated for a moment. The idea of entering Fatima's sanctuary, the place where most of her transgressions had occurred, scared her. But desperation was stronger than fear. She pushed the door open and entered the room, the flashlight beams sweeping over the objects, the curtains, the walls. If the devices were anywhere, it would be there, in the heart of the house, at the epicenter of her cruelty. She was in enemy territory, and the clock kept ticking. The hard drive unit, still in her hands, was a trophy, but one that did not guarantee her victory. The real battle was yet to be fought against the invisible eyes, the silent witnesses of her downfall. Aisha's flashlight beam swept Fatima's room, drawing circles of light and shadow over the antique furniture, the heavy curtains, and the soft carpets that muffled any sound. It was a sanctuary of quietude, a place where Fatima herself sought refuge, and where Aisha, ironically, had inflicted much of her cruelty. The air felt heavy, laden with the silent memories of the days when Fatima was a shadow, and Aisha, the tyrannical queen. The hard drive unit weighed in her hand, a cold reminder of what was at stake. Her eyes scanned every corner, every detail, searching for any hint of an invisible eye. The walls were adorned with intricate tapestries. The corners hid small niches with figurines. Aisha felt panic rise, a knot tightening in her throat. Ali was cunning. He wouldn't leave the devices exposed. She began her search methodically, though her mind was in a frenzy. First, the bookshelves, the carefully organized volumes. Her fingers slid impatiently over the spines. Nothing. Next, the picture frames, the wall mirrors. She lifted a small ceramic vase on an antique dresser. Beneath it, a tiny black dot stood out against the dark wood. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was minuscule, almost invisible, perfectly camouflaged, one of Ali's eyes. A wave of icy fury washed over her. That tiny dot, so innocent, had witnessed everything. The scorn in her eyes, the indifference on her face, the humiliation inflicted on the matriarch. With a muffled cry, Aisha smashed the vase against the dresser, shards flying, and the small device dragged along with it. She picked it up, rage boiling in her veins, and crushed it under her heel, feeling the plastic and metal give way with a dry snap. A sound of distorted victory echoed in the silence of the room. But she knew one wasn't enough. Ali wouldn't have risked it with just one recording point. There were more. She continued her search, her movements more urgent now, adrenaline coursing. She examined the bedside lamp, the digital clock, even the small antique radio Fatima liked to listen to. In every object, she saw a potential threat, a silent witness to her downfall. Her eyes found the carved wooden music box that sat on the bedside table. Fatima always kept it close, a family heirloom. Aisha approached, the flashlight beam illuminating the details. The winding mechanism was visible, but there was something else. A small, almost imperceptible hole, disguised in the floral carving. There it was, another eye. Aisha felt a knot in her throat. This music box was a gift from Ali to Fatima, a symbol of affection. To use it for espionage was a calculated cruelty, something only Ali, with his strategic mind, would do. Anger mingled with an even deeper sense of betrayal. He had used his mother's love against her. With the hard drive unit still in her hand, she squeezed the music box. The sound of the wood cracking, of the musical mechanism breaking, was almost as satisfying as the sound of the device disintegrating under her fingers. She threw the pieces on the floor, her breath ragged. 2 down. How many more? With each destruction, a part of Ali's sandcastle seemed to crumble. But the tension in Aisha did not diminish. The fear that Ali had made copies, that he had a plan B, gnawed at her. While Aisha indulged in this desperate hunt in the darkness, Ali, in his office, felt a strange unease. Fatima's melody had ceased some time ago, and the silence that followed was heavy, portending something. He had reviewed the files. The backups were on a secure external server, but he still felt the need to act. He knew Aisha would not surrender without a fight. He had anticipated her search for the hard drive, but not the extent of her determination to destroy the sources. A silent alarm in his security system, linked to motion sensors in the most sensitive areas, had not yet gone off. But he trusted his instinct. He knew she was on the move, that the confrontation was imminent. Ali picked up his cell phone, his hand steady. It was time to make some calls, not to the elders yet, not directly, but to his trusted men, those who would ensure the security of the mansion and Fatima. The night was far from over, and he needed to ensure that no matter what happened, his mother would be protected. Back in Fatima's room, Aisha was in a cold sweat. She had turned the room upside down, tearing curtains, undoing cushions, moving furniture. Another device was found and destroyed, this time camouflaged in the base of a lamp. The air was thick with the smell of dust, and the silence broken only by her ragged breathing. She stopped, exhausted, her eyes sweeping the destroyed room. 3 cameras. Would it be enough? She couldn't be sure. Doubt was a poison, corroding her newfound confidence. What if Ali had more? What if he had already acted? A faint sound came from the corridor, a floorboard creak perhaps. Or was it the wind? Aisha froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned off the flashlight, plunging the room into almost total darkness. The hard drive unit was still in her hand, but now it seemed more a burden than a trump card. The hunt was over, but the prey could be her. She heard footsteps, not the light steps of a maid. These were firm, decisive steps. Ali's steps. He was coming, and she was cornered in the heart of Fatima's sanctuary, with the evidence of her ruin in her hands and the wreckage of her lies at her feet. The final confrontation had arrived. The sound of firm, deliberate footsteps grew louder, closer. Aisha pressed herself against the wall, the hard drive a cold weight in her hand, her breath caught in her throat. The darkness of Fatima's room, once her accomplice, now felt like a trap. The air was thick with the dust she had stirred, the smell of fear. A sliver of light appeared as the door, already ajar, was pushed open a little further. Ali. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the faint light of the corridor. His gaze, usually warm, was now a shield of steel. He swept the room, taking in the chaos, the shattered vase, the broken music box, the torn curtains, the overturned furniture. His eyes finally landed on Aisha, huddled in the corner, the hard drive clutched to her chest like a desperate talisman. A heavy silence descended, broken only by Aisha's ragged breathing. Ali entered, his movements slow, deliberate. each step a declaration. He didn't need to ask. The destruction spoke volumes. His mother's sanctuary, desecrated, bore witness to Aisha's frantic and futile attempt to erase the truth. Aisha. Ali's voice was a grave murmur, devoid of its usual inflection. It was the voice of a judge, not a husband. "What are you doing?" His question was not for information. It was a formality, a portal to the inevitable. Aisha trembled, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and cornered fury. She looked at the ruined room, then back at Ali, searching for a weakness, a flicker of doubt, anything she could exploit. There was none. His face was a mask of cold resolve. I was looking at... I heard a noise," she stammered, her voice hoarse. A pathetic attempt to invent an excuse amidst the devastation, but the words died in her throat. The scene was undeniable. Ali didn't bother to argue. His eyes fell upon the hard drive in her hand. "Useless," he said, the word echoing with an icy finality. "The copies are safe, in multiple places. You can destroy the eyes, but you cannot destroy what they saw." Aisha felt the ground give way beneath her feet. The copies. Of course, he was too smart. All her effort, her fury, her desperate hunt, all had been in vain. A wave of despair washed over her, mixed with a cold, impotent rage. Suddenly, a movement on the bed. Fatima. The matriarch was sitting up, her eyes open, fixed on Ali, then on Aisha, and finally on the destruction that surrounded them. There was no fear in her eyes, only a deep stillness, an understanding that transcended words. The darkness of the room could not hide the dignity in her posture, even amidst fragility. Aisha saw Fatima's gaze. The absence of terror in those eyes, the silent knowing, was more devastating than any accusation from Ali. It was as if Fatima, the woman she had silenced and invisibilized, had finally recovered her voice through the chaos of truth. "Give me the disc." Ali extended his hand, his voice now an unquestionable command. Aisha clutched the disc even tighter, her knuckles white. A last spark of defiance ignited in her eyes. She would not surrender, not here, not now. She raised her arm, the disc in her hand, as if it were a shield or a weapon. But Ali was faster. With a swift movement, he took the disc from her hand, the force of his grip breaking her resistance. He looked at the disc, then at Aisha, his eyes filled with deep disappointment, but without surprise. "You are no longer welcome in this house," he declared, the words cutting through the air like blades. "Tonight, you leave. Forever." Aisha staggered backward. Ali's words piercing her more deeply than any physical blow. Exile, disgrace. Her life, her status, her power, all crumbled around her, reduced to ashes like the devices she had tried to destroy. She looked at Fatima again, expecting to see triumph, but found only a silent serenity. The matriarch didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply existed, finally visible, irreducible. Ali turned to Fatima, and the hardening in his countenance softened into deep love and relief. He approached the bed, took his mother's wrinkled hand. Fatima squeezed his hand back, her eyes communicating a silent gratitude, a peace regained. The weight of the world seemed to have been lifted from his shoulders. The sound of hurried footsteps came from the corridor, low, firm voices. Ali's men were already there, answering his call. The sheikh had acted. Aisha knew there was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. Her reign of cruelty had come to an end. She was unmasked, defeated, and the door to her old life was now closed forever. Justice, silent and relentless, had finally found its way back home.